You're listening to Mark of the Maker. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Steiner and you're listening to Mark of the Maker, and this is one of our mini episodes. So we do these on occasion. These are sort of shorter than a full episode. Typically, we'll see how long this one goes. And we can deep dive into little specific topics that maybe one of the folks on the panel is interested in or wants to talk about. And this time I have Mr. Tom Krein with me.
Hey, Mark, this should be fun.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be a good one. And I think hopefully informational for people, because I think what we're going to talk about is a topic that people sometimes, in some cases, probably don't understand at all.
Well, I get a lot of questions about it.
Right, exactly.
Still, I mean,
after this many years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting topic because some people don't understand it. I think some people misunderstand it, which is okay, but I think we're going to help clear it up for them. But before we get into it, we need to give a thank you to our sponsor and supporter, American Metal Exchange. George Pelagonia over there at American Metal Exchange, or AMX, has some great materials for knife makers, things ranging from Damasteel to titanium to specialty materials like Mokame and Mokutai. George always has an interesting array of materials for your knife making needs. So please go see George, tell him we sent you, and get the stuff you need to make some beautiful knives. You can find George on the web at www.amxinc.com. That's amxinc.com. So this one's about regrinds, which probably makes sense with Tom because I know you've done a zillion of them. Let's dive right into that, Tom. Regrind, what is it? Why would people want one? And maybe we should start with just the basics of geometry so people can kind of get the lay of the land.
Okay. So basically, it's all about performance, right? So basically, a regrind is done on a existing knife, which is where the term regrind came from, because I'm going to grind it again. And basically, performance is about geometry, steel, and heat treat. It's kind of a three-legged stool is how I kind of always describe it. And those three things are what creates performance. And most factory knives they're made thicker than they need to be for cutting, because a lot of these factories don't want to get these knives back all the time because people don't know how to use them. I still see, factory knife, folder knife blades getting broken just because people use them differently. So basically,
people are using them to pry or try to turn a screw in emergency, or maybe not even an emergency because they happen to be in their pocket or whatever, right?
My dad always carried a Stockman and always there was blades broken off on it,
Right,
eventually he'd have to get another one because he'd break all the blades off of it. I fixed that by getting him a Swiss Army Soldier, which had screwdrivers and awls on it. And he carried those for several years with no problem. But really, it's performance oriented. Basically, these factories are overbuilding knives. You're getting knives with behind the secondary bevel. So let's describe that. Most knives have a primary and a secondary bevel. The primary bevel goes all the way to the spine, right? But it's not sharpened. So your edge is however thick from the factory, and that secondary bevel is when they sharpen it. So you have a primary and a secondary bevel.
So when people look at a knife and they talk about the grind, most of the time what they're talking about is that primary grind, right? The big ground face.
Yep. And then the secondary bevel is actually when it's sharpened. So you've heard like Ernie Emerson does zero grind knives, or a lot of bushcraft knives, or Scandi ground, which is also should be a zero grind. There's no secondary bevel on those. It literally comes down and it's sharp. Okay, the primary edge goes all the way to the sharp. There's no secondary bevel. So hopefully that gives people an idea of that primary and secondary bevel.
Yeah, the secondary is the shiny part that folks see on most knives, like a Spyderco or a Sebenza or whatever. It's the piece that you actually sharpen. So people that have actually sharpened knives know that there's that little shiny edge. Sometimes they hit it with a Sharpie or something so they can see what they're doing, but it's the secondary bevel.
And on a zero grind, or a Scandi grind, you would lay that whole primary bevel flat to sharpen.
Straight to the edge, yep.
Yeah. Traditionally. Some people put secondary bevels on Scandies. That's a whole nother story topic. I don't think that should ever happen, but hey, it's your knife. You do what you want.
We don't do religion on the show, Tom.
Right.
So.
Yeah. You follow your own beliefs on that. It's wrong, but anyways. So yeah, so those are the kind of the terms, right? And with a regrind, we're going to improve the geometry by thinning the primary bevel down.
There you go.
So basically making it cut better by improving the geometry, making it thinner at the edge. And this takes away from the all-around use. If you want to pry with a knife, you probably shouldn't use a regrind, but it significantly improves the cutting ability, and a great benefit that a lot of people don't think about is it's much easier to sharpen.
Right.
Because you literally have to remove like a third as much material or less,
Yeah, for people that have sharpened a knife, a production knife, especially a production knife that gets labeled as a quote hard use knife or whatever, a lot of times if they put it on a Wicked Edge or the Spyderco sticks or something else, or DMT rig setup, that's where people will see that shiny secondary bevel gets really wide, right?
Yeah, it can get really crazy wide.
Yeah, and so the reason you're seeing that secondary bevel get so crazy wide is because the material is thicker there, right?
Yeah.
So
and what's happening is on the secondary bevel, say from the factory it comes at a 30 and they decide to put a 15. So you're thinning that edge down, but it's still going to be thick about a quarter of an inch up.
Right.
So it acts more like a wedge almost, but you can get a crazy good edge with that by thinning just the bevel, and it will increase performance some, but not the same amount.
Right, because when you're cutting through stuff, it's more than just that tiny point that's left where the sides of the secondary bevel meet. Right, you actually have to go through a material sometimes, right?
Yeah.
If you're trimming threads off a sweater or something, okay, that's one thing. But if you're actually going to cut through meat or something else, then
say like the plastic containers you buy something from Walmart in,
Yep.
Those you can notice a real big difference with a full regrind versus just the edge sharpen. The edge sharpen will cut it great, but you're still having to force that thicker blade geometry through, or anything, cheese, whatever.
Cheese. I'm on the same
good
page.
Cheese is a good example, because if you're trying to push that wedge through, it just doesn't work as good as if it's a full flat and it's thin all the way up.
And it's sticky stuff that wants to hang the blade, and not just cheese does that, right? Lots of stuff does. So
just as an example.
Yeah. So if we're talking about this geometry thing, so sometimes you'll hear people, they'll talk about how a blade is, quote, thin behind the edge. That's exactly what we're talking about, right? Is thinning out that material that's behind that secondary bevel to try to make it cut better.
Yeah, and if you're really performance oriented, not for cutting, not for prying, not for general utility, whatever. And I carry a regrind pretty much every day. I've got a Mannix M4 in my pocket right now. And as long as you understand, hey, I've got to cut, I can't twist. If you're one of those guys that wants to like rock the blade back and forth as you cut through something, this is not for you.
Right.
It's all about they're plenty strong as long as you're putting force from the spine to the edge. It's that lateral, especially with some of these harder steels that we're doing, like M390 and some of this kind of stuff. They're not super strong steels to start with, but as long as you're cutting, you're fine. Funny story, I had a knife, and this was a ZT Hinder that I'd reground and made it into a clip point and some other stuff. And I was helping my brother-in-law trim some trees from a shooting lane around his stand so he could deer hunt. And, as long as you know what you're doing, you're great. So I was, it's kind of cold out, not super cold for here, probably in the 30s. Basically, I was just taking finger-sized branches and I was just hitting them pretty hard with my regrind, and it was just taking them off, right?
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law was like, oh, I got one over here. Can I borrow your knife? And I'm like, note to self, never do this, but handed him my knife, and I see him, he starts pushing it into the blade, and then he tries to pry the blade off, or the limb off the tree, and I hear kink, and he gets it and he hands it back, and I've got a nickel-sized knock out of the back of my knife, and
ouch.
now I have gigantic serrations on that blade, and it works pretty good, but not ideal. Side to side action is not recommended.
So yeah, this isn't for every use case. This is for a pretty specific use case, a regrind.
Yeah.
And I think,
well, for me, folders aren't really hard use knives. I mean, I shouldn't be chopping with a folder. I shouldn't be prying with a folder.
yeah,
That's just me personally, the way I think. And a lot of my customers seem to think that the same way. You know, it's for cutting. I want the utmost cutting ability.
no, for sure. I have had and still have a number of your regrinds, and I really, really like the performance of them. They're fantastic. But I absolutely can see, as a factory that makes tens of thousands of a model, maybe, why they would make it to the beefy side, because they know someone's going to take a folder, and even though you shouldn't do it, they're going to baton it through something, or they're going to pry with it, or, you know, all the stuff that you're not supposed to do with a folder, they're going to do it anyway. And, you know, quote, because it can, right? But that's not what this is for. This is purely a cutting performance thing.
And maybe now is a good place to jump ahead just a little bit. Does a regrind void the warranty? It seems obvious to me.
Yeah.
You know, that it would void the warranty, and it does void the warranty. It's just part of the performance, you know. I mean, I don't understand how anyone would think that it wouldn't void the warranty. I'm upfront with that, saying that it 100% voids the warranty. So if you have questions as to that, you know, rest assured it does void the warranty.
Yeah, right. You're changing the geometry of the blade physically by removing steel. So yeah, people should assume it voids the warranty and you're on your own, which I don't know. I think a lot of people end up feeling that way anyway, but there are definitely people who've probably had the experience who didn't understand that, or forgot it, or didn't realize it, or whatever, right? And then,
I mean, it'd be like taking a Ford Pinto and dropping a Chevy 350 in it. Ford's not going to back up that, you know. I mean,
right?
It's just what it is.
Even though it'd be way more awesome.
Yeah, it would. I mean, probably do wheelies and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yes.
Might not even blow up. I don't know.
Come on now.
Well, I'm just saying that was a gas tank issue.
Yeah, that was Tom that said that, not Mark. Let's just be completely clear. Okay, so let's talk about, voids the warranty. So that's a great thing to get out of the way up front. When we're talking about the primary bevel, the big piece of the bevel,
right?
People talk about hollow grind, flat grind. Why don't you explain to people what the difference is between the two and why they might want one versus the other?
Well, here's the thing, and I get a lot of people, hey, can you do a hollow grind on this, or can you do a flat grind on that? And the answer oftentimes is, you know, dictated by the actual blade. So I can't go in on a blade and add material or change the grind. Like oftentimes I'm like, hey, can you do a Scandi grind on this? No, I can't do a Scandi grind. It's already ground too much. If it's hollow ground or flat ground, I can't Scandi grind, right?
Right.
The whole Scandi grind is, you know, 15 or 12 and a half included angle, primary grind, no secondary grind. So I can't really go change that. And you know, like some blades, I can't, like, say it, if it's already ground to a certain point, I can't do a flat grind. If it's already, you know, I have to be able to match my wheel. I have to, if I can't clean out a hollow grind, or I can't, sometimes they're hollow ground too much that I can't do a flat grind, it kind of dictates what I can do.
Yeah. From a geometry perspective, a flat grind on that primary bevel means from the, I'm going to use quotes because this is what people call it, the grind line, where the top part of the grind starts. And sometimes, like on a Spyderco, that's the spine, right? Yeah,
so it'd be edge to spine usually.
Yeah.
And it might not go all the way to the spine, but that's the feel.
Right. So if you cut the blade in half and looked at it from the end, it would be a straight line from where the secondary bevel stops to the spine or the grind line. That's a flat grind.
Yeah. So basically there's three types of grinds. You've got hollow, flat, and convex. Okay. And basically a hollow grind could also be called a concave grind, and it's often done on a wheel. It's done on a wheel. So you have, when you're grinding it, you get that wheel shape. And so you get that hollow, quote unquote, grind. A flat grind is often done on a flat plat, and it can be done up and down on a wheel, which is a weird way to do it. And you can also do a convex that way, which I've done quite a few, by just kind of blending. But a flat grind is often done on a flat platen. So you, from edge to spine, you get that flat. And a convex is done on a slack belt or a rotary platen or something like that, or on a wheel, where you're holding the blade tip up, tip down type thing.
Yep.
And so those are the three primary grinds. Now, a Scandi grind is basically a modified flat grind. It's like a set angles, and so the thickness of the blade is going to dictate your height from there, but it's basically 12.5 grain angle on each side.
Right. So when people see like your bushcraft knives, they'll see that, or they will have noticed that primary bevel isn't there, right?
Right.
With the Scandi ground bushcraft knives, they'll just see.
Whoa. The primary and the secondary are the same.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. And it's way down at the edge, straight to the edge.
And there's pros and cons on all these, right? So, a flat grind is going to be stronger. It has more material. But as you sharpen it, it gets wedgy really fast. It starts getting thick. That's the beauty of a hollow grind, and why hollow grinds are really nice for hunting knives. You can sharpen that knife for 20 years. Every year you sharpen it before you go deer hunting or whatever, and it'll stay thin, as you sharpen it, so it'll still perform well. Right. And convex grinds are, often seen on like a axe or something like that. They don't wedge when you chop. They're basically really reinforce that edge, so it gives a lot more strength. So a lot of times you think of these as chopping knives, Right. So yeah, those are the main three types of grinds.
Okay. So say someone had a knife that was a candidate for either a hollow or a flat regrind. Maybe you just explained that, but why would they pick one versus the other? Really back to the cutting performance thing? Yeah,
it has to do with extended sharpening, really, is really the main two things. If the blades are the same thickness and you flat grind, hollow grind, one of each, the flat grind is going to be a little stronger, but it's going to be wedgier over time as you sharpen it.
There you go.
But really, when you're talking regrinds, it's limited to the blade and to the actual knife. And there's a lot of things that people don't think about. Like, people ask me, "Hey, can you regrind this?" And I've gotten much pickier on what I will and won't regrind. But if it has a thumb stud, can I remove the thumb stud?
Key thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be removed, because when I put the blade to the wheel, I would grind off the thumb stud.
Right, right.
Does the grind go behind the handle? If it does, can I take the knife out of the handle? Like, there's some knives, like some of the Benchmade assisted open stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I tried one of those the first time, and it's still here in the shop somewhere because I could never put it back together. I had to buy that gentleman a new knife, and I sent him a new knife. I said, "Sorry, I can't do anything with this."
Yeah.
If I can't take it apart, and I can't take the thumb stud off or some stuff like that, then yeah, it's just not optional.
Right. Okay. So chances are, if someone says, "Hey, Tom, I have this knife. I'd like to have it cut a little better. Can you regrind it for me?" Chances are, it sounds like you're going to say, well, yes or no. And if it's yes, the answer probably is I could do it as a flat grind, or I could do it as a hollow grind.
Right.
But chances are, with any specific knife, it's probably not going to be an option.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And it's funny, for me, it's always been about performance regrinds. It's not about looks. I don't, I get requests, "Hey, can you do a finer finish?" No, I'm sorry, I don't. This is not my main gig. If you want like a fancy knife, buy a custom knife.
Yeah.
I do a certain grit finish, which is not super high. It's all about performance. I don't do really any crazy grinds. I have done a few compound grinds on the squid because it lends itself fairly easy to that. With the D2 steel, I won't do it with the other steels. They're not they get too thin basically for the steel to hold up well.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty selective. It's not about nightmare grinds. I don't do any of that. There's people that do that. I don't.
Yeah.
I've got too much other stuff going on, and it's, it's kind of a side gig, and I take a few in, and that's about it. And I'm very selective anymore on what I will and won't do. And I know it probably upsets some people because they have stuff that they want done, but if I've got a ZT of my own personal here, and I can't take it apart because it's got some proprietary hardware on it, and it's just how it is.
Yeah, because this thing, you were doing regrinds a long time ago, right? So This has been kind of a little bit of an on again, off again. You weren't doing them for a while, at least officially, right? This was kind of like totally filler work kind of thing. So I guess we can cover that in the history, but yeah, I stopped for 2 or 3 years. I didn't do any regrinds. Right.
I just stopped because I was like, it just got overwhelming. I was literally doing about 30 or 40 or more a week. And I was getting boxes from places like, I got a box from Thailand, and it had like 40 Emerson blades, 35 or 40 Emerson blades in it. And it had like a typed out list of what they wanted on each blade, So, well, it got overwhelming. I couldn't do my own work anymore.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. You gotta do the right things for your business. That's the deal at the end of the day. And like you said, there are other people that do this stuff. So your thing's really, again,
there wasn't when I started though.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right. So I know that on your stuff that you do now, in most cases, maybe all cases now, there's a specific logo for this, right? You made a Krein Regrind logo. Can you explain what that's all about? Maybe we talked about this in an earlier episode, but it's perfect to fit here.
Yeah. So everything I do now has the Krein Regrind logo on it. I get asked not to do it, and I'm like, I'm sorry, if you want the regrind, it comes with the logo. And there's a reason for it. Basically, when I started, one of the knives that I was doing was the Hinderer knife, and I reached out to Rick, make sure it was okay, right? So it seems legit. Because one of the things with Rick Hinderer's knives, if you have a custom and a production side by side, the real difference is the grind.
Right.
And so when I talked to Rick, he was worried that, hey, how are people going to know? And as far as I know, I'm the only person that's actually been given Rick's blessings to do a regrind on a Hinderer knife. That's because I was friends with him before, and when we talked about this, and that was the main difference, I'm like, well, what if we did a logo? And so I came up with this logo, and he was like, if you logo them, I'm 100% good with it.
Nice.
And so we do the regrind logo, and it goes on everything I do now. There's no sterile. There used to be, you could get them sterile. That was years and years ago.
Right.
But not anymore. Things have changed, right? Back then I was hungry, and I wanted to please everyone, and I still want to please people, but I do what I want to do. I please myself first, right?
Well, yeah, and it has to fit in the ecosystem, right? So
yeah.
I think part of the concern on some of the early stuff was sometimes people, because I saw this before, people would sell a reground knife as a custom.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that was a mistake of misunderstanding. Sometimes it was pulling a little wool over people's eyes.
Yeah,
I'll let whatever. We're not going to throw shade on that so much, but the fact was that people would sell intentionally or unintentionally a reground knife as a custom, and then that presents a problem for the original maker, right?
Well, now there's no doubt,
with the logo, there's no doubt, right? So that's the great part about the logo, is that it clears all of that up.
And I also like to think that it adds something, it's, this is a regrind by Tom Krein or whatever, it's not like there's no doubt. You're not wondering who did it.
Yeah.
There's not a card that you have to keep with a knife. It's just, it's what it is.
Yeah. Knife changes hands. It's still very clear who did that work to it. And I think, although no one questions the improvement in performance, I think for the maker, the original maker that produced the knife in the first place, And that could even be you, right? If someone had one of your knives and knocked the handles off and put new handles on it, and sent it back to you and said, oh, the handles are loose. That's not your problem, right?
Right. It's documentation, that isn't going to get separated from the knife. There's no doubt. And that's what I don't want to do. I don't want to cause problems for anyone that I'm doing this work for. Spyderco, ZT, anyone. As long as I put my logo on it, there's no doubt.
Exactly. Clears everything up.
Yeah.
Okay. So we kind of were poking at this a little bit, but this regrind thing is not new, right? You've been doing it a long time. Do you know anything about where this all came from?
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the thing. It'd be foolish for me to think that I started the regrind, right? Custom makers have been doing this forever. I'm guessing, you get a knife and you want to improve the performance a little bit for yourself. I know for a fact, I saw Bob Dozier do it on a vintage Gerber folder, which made me cry at the time, just about, one of the old wooden handled, really mint ones. But a customer came in, he's like, hey, can you thin this down? And he was like, yeah. And at the time I didn't really think anything about it. And it, growing up, my grandpa did this too, kind of, whenever he sharpened his knife, he laid that thing totally flat on the stone. And that's how he taught me, you just lay it down flat, and basically he was reprofiling the knife, which is what a regrind does. Right.
Yep.
As a kid, I had a friend, a gentleman that I was friends with his kids, and he did a lot of carving, and we started with, he was like, you need to get one of these knives. And it was the first knife I bought. It was an Schrade sharp finger, right?
Yeah.
Those things were super wedgy. And he was like, well, the first thing you need to do is take this super coarse stone and basically spend a couple hours and reprofile it. And so I did. And so that, I knew geometry made a difference on performance, depending on what you're carving, cutting, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Were those knives basically being taken to a zero?
Very
Is that
close,
what was going on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because, for wood carving and stuff, that thinner flat really made a difference.
Yeah.
And that was before I understood about the Scandi grind.
Okay.
Which I think is even better for carving. But anyways. So yeah, as far as the history of the regrind, quote unquote, I actually went on Blade forums. I haven't been on there in a while, and it was kind of fun. But I went back and I searched this. It took a while to find. But this all started with Cliff Stamp. I don't know if you remember Cliff Stamp.
Yep.
Love him or hate him, a lot of people really hated him back then. I've always, I've questioned some of the stuff he's done in the past, as far as like back then he was chopping up concrete blocks and stuff. And I guess people were asking about that. I always felt that was abuse. But, Cliff was an interesting guy. And I think where he's gotten to now, he's no longer on Blade Forums. He's got his own place, but he's all about performance.
Yeah.
And I like to think that I have a little bit to do with that right here in this particular instance, because in the knife maker area, I went and looked. It was May 11, 2005. So this was my first regrind. And I actually came up with a term because somebody called it a regrind in there. I was like, oh, he was like, when you regrind, and I was like, hey, that's it. I kind of suck at naming things, and this was pretty descriptive and kind of told exactly what it was. So regrind is what I went with. But Cliff asked for a volunteer. I mean, he was going to pay him, but he's looking for a knife maker. And so where did he go? At the time, Blade Forums was really the place, right? And there was, I don't even think I was on, I for sure know I wasn't on USN at that time.
Yeah, USN in 05 was a pretty small community.
Yeah. I think I got on maybe a year later or so, or right after that sometime, which is another cool story. A.G. Russell, I was in his office, and he was like, hey, do you know about this USN thing? I'm like, huh?
Oh, that's cool.
But anyways, A.G. had his finger on the pulse pretty good back then.
Yeah, apparently.
Long story short, or short story long, Cliff asked, hey, can anybody do this? And he threw down some pretty specific requirements. He was like, I've got a Falk Niven U2, so that was my first regrind. And he's like, I want it 5 thousandths at the edge. 1/8 of an inch up, I want it 10 thousandths of an inch. And a 1/4 inch up, I want it 15 thousandths of an inch. And at the time, I've been making knives for probably, I don't know, on my own for about 5 years now. After I quit Bob Dozier at 2000 roughly. Or no, in 98. I quit Bob at 98, and then I guess I'd worked for A.G. Russell for a couple years and been on my own for a while. Anyways, at the time, I wasn't super well known. I had a pretty decent reputation, but when I get on blade forums and I'd see all the experts on there and they're talking about grinding a blade, and it would take them like 2 days to finish a blade.
Yeah.
And I was just like, it kind of blew me away at the time, because it was like, I'm grinding 10 blades in that time.
Right.
But you know what I mean? It's like, here I was, and these guys are all saying it can't be done. And I don't like it when people say it can't be done. And they were throwing a lot of shade, and it was interesting. There's some big names in there. If you ever look at that thread, it was kind of a interesting thing. And I've got a lot of people were saying it couldn't be done. I was like, hey, I reached out to Cliff and I was like, hey, Cliff, I'll try.
Right. Yeah. Personal challenge issued.
Yeah. I was like, why not? And so that was right before Blade. I told him I'd do it after Blade, and I ended up doing it and sending it back. And I when I did it, I told him, I said, I'll get it as close to your specs as possible. I don't know that I can get it exactly, and what you're asking. He's like, get it as close as you can. Nobody else is even willing to try.
Right.
So I sent it back, and it was he put the specs on there, and it was, because I would not remember. I had it 4 thousandths of an inch at the edge, and 1/8 of an inch up, it was 12 thousandths. So I was off a couple thousandths. And then at 1/4 of an inch, it was 15, or no, I had it at 21 thousandths. So
yeah,
it was a little more, but he was able to test it, and because he didn't know if it was going to hold up or not, and it did really well.
Huh.
It really surprised him at the time, and he was basically, it was interesting. There was an older gentleman, Alvin Johnson, and I would not have remembered this without reading through the post, which was kind of a fun trip down memory lane. But
yeah,
apparently he was in Arizona somewhere, and he was grinding on a homemade grinder with a stone.
Oh, really?
And he was doing 1095 blades with the specs, that Cliff wanted, but he wouldn't do stainless. And so, yeah, it was kind of interesting. This guy was grinding basically, they're basically straight razors, about when I do a razor now, I take it to about 4 thousandths.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you talked about those specs, I'm like, damn, 4 thousandths at the edge is thin.
Yeah, that's literally about half the thickness of a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
To give people a little perspective, a sheet of paper is about 8 thousandths. Here comes a train. I can't mute it either because I'm the only one. Nobody else can
fill in the spot.
Yeah.
That's all right. People are used to the train by now, Tom. It's a feature of the show.
Yeah. So, a regrind today, when I regrind them, I shoot for 8 to 10 thousandths at the edge. I found that to be pretty well, makes a pretty big difference in the performance, especially like some of the Spydercos right now are about 35 to 45 thousandths behind the cutting edge.
Yeah.
And so when you take them down to 10 thousandths, it makes a big difference. That's literally like a 4 times thicker.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
So,
yeah, and I those numbers that you rattled off that's definitely a hollow, right?
Yeah,
because it's not a linear thing. If you plotted those numbers out from the edge to 10 to 1/8 inch back to a 1/4 of an inch back, that's a hollow. And when you're doing this, and I think we talked about this in a very early episode, you're using a wheel. So the belt is wrapped around a wheel. That's what creates the hollow, right? It's putting a concave shape into the blade. And it's not just take that diameter of the wheel and imprint it on the blade. You're walking that hollow shape.
Yeah, and that's so beginner knife making 101, there's actually some charts out there that say if you've got this size of a wheel and your blade thickness is this high, you can only go this high, and that's a bunch of bullshit. Straight up. I try not to cuss on here very much, but that's just what it is.
Yeah, they're using straight geometry.
Yeah, and that's not how knife makers work. Basically, I can grind a straight razor that's 0.004 of an inch and doesn't start getting thick for, half an inch up.
Right. Almost to the spine, right?
Yeah, because you can rock it up. You can ride it up.
Yep.
Those charts are crap. If you're starting knife making, just throw those away. Don't let people tell you what you can and can't do, because most professional level knife makers know that that's rubbish. It's the people that, it just is.
Tom's giving some dad speech action right now. It's beautiful. You can do anything.
I'm throwing it down. So, but I mean, it's interesting looking back at history, that was in 2005. And it's like, you start wondering, for a while I was doing a lot, and I still do a lot. Like every once in a while I'll do a run for like GP Knives or Urban EDC or whatever. And like right now they're I think Urban EDC is sending me a batch, and I'll do 35 Techno 2s or something for them. And,
oh, that's cool.
I've done the Benchmade proppers for GP Knives, and, I still do quite a few, and I've got probably 6 or 8 here in the shop right now that I'm doing, and I'll get them out, and turnaround time is, I say 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it's a little longer. It depends on what's going on. I mean, it's a busy shop and life happens. I mean,
well, and
I do my best to turn them around.
And at this point, it's almost more like a courtesy promo thing than it is. It's not your primary business. So this is
right.
When it can fit, it fits, and when it can't fit, it doesn't get done. Right? It has to fit in the flow somewhere.
And I really like doing regrinds, because it kind of blows people's minds a little bit, honestly. If you get one and you've never had one, it changes everything.
Oh yeah. What was that Spyderco I got from you last year? I think Keith got one too.
Was that the Techno 2?
It wasn't a Techno. Shoot, which one?
Oh, was it a Rhino? It's carbon fiber with an upswept blade.
I'm almost sure it was carbon, but it seemed like it was a Japanese steel. I don't know if it was super gold or if it was, the blue paper steel or something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was a great example where it's like, okay, this is a great knife in the first place, right? Really great.
I love Spyderco.
Real deal Spyder. Yeah, they're solid. They cut nice out of the box, right?
Pretty much what I carry every day.
Yeah, and when I got that thing from Tom, I talked about it on the show then. It's like, holy shit, does this thing cut like crazy. It's really, really insane. And then, I know you've done a bunch of traditional slip joint stuff, right? Production slip joint stuff.
Hundreds of GECs.
And those are totally outstanding, right? Because, and it's kind of funny because to me, I tend to think of Regrind as more of a technical user kind of thing. And so when I first saw that you were doing those, I'm like, well, that's weird. A regrind on a traditional, that seems super odd, but it's almost like the more perfect use case, because I don't think, aside from, your grandpa or mine or my dad or your dad or whatever, right? Those people probably use them harder than anybody does today.
Oh yeah.
And
try to find one in good shape, like that actually got used. They wore them down to nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. I have one, I think, from my grandfather that was sharpened to where the overall blade got half the length or less, right?
Yeah, the width.
Yeah, maybe even because it, got broken. Who knows? But I think most use cases today for traditional knives, not that the rest of them aren't, but they're generally lighter duty, right? They're a little knife that someone uses to cut their food or whatever.
They got an 1/8 inch brass rod for a pivot,
Right. They're not hard use devices. They're not made that way. So they make a perfect case for this thing because
for precision cutter.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too. So Great Eastern Cutlery, the way they grind them really works well for a regrind too, because they're actually pretty thin. They're about 15 thousandths plus or minus a little bit behind the edge, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when you do a regrind, I mean, that's like, I've taken it down, 30% or something,
Yeah.
I take it down to 8, a half, 50%. And that makes a difference. But the way they're ground is interesting too. So they're not cammed. So on a Great Eastern Cutlery where it's up like a drop point or a clip point, they get thicker the higher they go up. So I don't know if you've noticed that, but they're ground straight in and out, right? They're not cammed.
Yeah.
So if you've got one of those knives, when I regrind it, I thin the tip down so it's the same thickness as the rest of the grind. So all of a sudden the tip becomes useful because they're really pretty thick on a regular Great Eastern cutlery knife.
Yeah.
And kind of clubby out there at the end, which on a precision knife or on a traditional knife, that's where I really want that nice thin tip where I can like dig out a splinter or whatever.
Right.
So it does make a difference on the GECs.
Yeah, I think that's a common thing on a factory ground knife. People will see, right, if they look really close at that secondary bevel, when it gets out toward the tip, sometimes it's very wide and it's hard to even get sharp.
Well, on most knives, on most modern production knives, I don't see that as much, like on the Spydercos and the ZTs, because they're all ground on a machine that, you know, a CNC machine that it's cammed. So as it comes out, it can thin that down. But the GECs, especially the Great Eastern cutlery knives, that seems to be a problem. But
yeah, just part of the production process, right? They're not designing it for you to regrind it. It's just part of what it is, but you can improve it. That's a cool thing.
I carried my favorite GEC is a single spring 53. So you've got the main clip blade, and it's a bigger slip joint. You know, we're talking like 3-inch blade, and then it's got a pin blade on the same spring on the back, and that personally is probably my favorite GEC.
All right, so even though this is a side gig, and I know you mentioned just a couple minutes ago, hundreds of GECs, how many total regrinds do you think you've done?
Man, I've thought about this a little bit, and I honestly don't know, but it's interesting if you go on Instagram and put in hashtag regrind, it's over 1,000 posts.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that's not all of them either.
Oh, no.
Yeah, over the years. I know at one point, so when I started getting back into the regrinds again, so at one point I stopped for about 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And when I got back in, I started doing the GECs because I really like the Great Eastern cutleries. Basically, at one point, I was buying those like crazy. I think I had over 1,000 GECs in the shop at one point.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so I was
busting them out. I know that. I remember seeing.
I was a Great Eastern cutlery dealer. I still am. And like one year at Blade, I went to their booth, and whatever they didn't sell, I bought everything that was left.
Wow.
Because I really like those knives. At some point, I really want to try to do some slip joints myself, but till that point, you know, Great Eastern cutleries are great. They do a great job.
Yeah.
And I still have probably, I don't know, in my own personal collection, I had 300 to 400 at one time. I'm down to about 200 now, but wow. Yeah, I probably did close to 1,000 GECs. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm guessing there's 2,000 or 3,000 regrinds out there. I did lots of Spydercos back in the day.
Right.
It's kind of interesting because, you know, back in the day, the Spyderco Delica and Endura, they were saber ground. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
So yeah, the early ones were saber ground. They were hollow grind, and it only went about halfway up the blade.
Oh yeah, okay. And
everybody wanted a flat grind, and I can remember sitting with Sal and talking to him, and he was like, "Nobody wants a flat grind." I'm like, "Well, I'm regrinding a lot of them, and you know, I think this would be popular." And he's like, they just wouldn't look right. We're sticking with what we're doing. I'm like, okay, I'm making good money regrinding them, so that works. But yeah, eventually I did enough, and enough people posted them that I feel that I helped Spyderco make the decision to flat grind the Delica and Enduras and start flat grinding more of their products. I don't know for sure. Sal never told me that, but I definitely feel that I had a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, influence if nothing else.
Yeah.
That actually was a marketable feature for Spydercos at one point, right? Maybe they even to this day, people refer to them as FFG, full flat grind.
Yep.
And I think even Spyderco calls them that now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting.
But that was not a thing when I started. They were all saber ground, hollow saber.
Wow.
So yeah, kind of cool.
All right. So we got people to geometry for some folks that might not be as familiar, or to clear it up for people that I think was really good. And we talked about this a little, but again, people need to remember that if they want to do this regrind thing or or use a reground knife, or if they buy a reground knife, that's what they need to know, is that this is a specific use case and they shouldn't go pry or do other goofy stuff with it.
Yeah, oftentimes I get asked, hey, does this weaken the blade? And once again, this is kind of like, does it void the warranty? Of course it weakens the blade. I mean,
it's science.
You can't take away and make it stronger. I mean, technically, I guess you probably could if you were making an I-beam or something like that.
Yeah.
But for what we're doing, it's not going to get stronger. You know. Now, the question is, does it weaken the blade detrimentally? And that I guess that depends on your use, but not really for what we're doing. You know, it's still plenty strong to do the cutting tasks that we're laying out, right? It's, you know, if you pry with it, you're going to break it.
Right.
And if you twist cut, you're probably going to knock chips out of the edge. And that's why I kind of standardized around 8 to 10 thousandths of an inch at the edge before sharpening, because that I found was like that happy medium, right?
Yeah.
It really does increase the performance quite a bit, and it still is strong enough for most tasks that you should be doing with a folder anyways. You shouldn't be like using it for a screwdriver or any of that crap.
Right.
If you want to do that, get a multi-tool.
Yeah. I think one of our listeners, I think Jack Conan is his name. He's a guy that makes straight razors on occasion. And I think he shared a video in there, or maybe one of our listeners shared a video in there of the thing that maybe a lot of our listeners have seen before, where somebody's kind of showing the flex in the edge because it's so thin, and your typical regrind is thicker than that, right? But
not much. You can usually get them to flex a little if you use a brass rod.
Okay.
I can do it on my fingernail, but I don't want to recommend that because it kind of freaks people out. Anybody cutting their thumb off. Well, he said to.
It would be bad. But that's how thin we're talking, right? Which, again, fabulous for cutting, actual cutting.
I'm going to guess that if he's doing straight razors and he's showing that, it's about 3 to 4 thousandths. Yeah. And you can get some crazy, like it'll flex 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch up the blade when you do that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Sal Monero's shown some of that on some of his straight razor stuff before too, and it's like you kind of twist your mind a little bit, like, oh shit, that is thin, right?
Yeah,
and it's not that it's not strong; it's that it isn't for anything other than cutting, right? Yeah. I mean, I guess it is not strong, but I don't know. Like you said,
strong enough.
Use case matters.
Yes. Yeah, I'd actually reground a knife for a friend. He gave it to his brother, and he was doing, he lives in Idaho, and I think he was doing grouse, maybe? I don't know, some kind of bird. And he was used to using it to cut the legs off.
Yeah.
And he went to do that, and he cut right through the leg, and he buried it into his thumb. He's like, the amount of force needed I didn't even use the amount of force I would have normally used to do that. And he's like, there was no force needed. It went right through and into my thumb. So.
Yeah. Cool and ouch.
Yeah. Sounded horrible.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he's blood brothers with the grouse now.
With the grouse? Yeah. I think he ate it.
Too funny. So this thing, we kind of talked about a little bit with Rick's stuff before. There has to be some interesting stories, both from customers and from people whose knives you've reground before with this whole thing. Yeah.
The one that sticks out most is probably doing regrinds on Chris Reeves knives.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I've probably done 30 or more over the years. And the thing with Chris Reeves knives, you know, we talked about earlier how you got to be able to remove the thumb studs and this kind of thing. Well, with a single thumb stud, it's no problem. They're press fit. You can knock it out. No problem. With their double thumb stud, it started being a problem because basically the way that works is the first one's a press fit and it has a hole, and the second one has a stud and it fits in that hole and it's a press fit. So basically they're not removable, right?
Yeah. Well, removable, but maybe not put backable.
Yeah. So basically you can remove them by grinding them and destroying them.
Right.
Because, I mean, you have to get down to where you can punch the other one out, right?
Yep.
So they're they're basically not replaceable. And so what I was doing is I'd reach out to Ann, and Ann was fully aware of what I was doing, and I'd do a regrind, and I would send it to Ann, because they won't send you the thumb studs, and she would put a new thumb stud in it.
Yeah. I think we talked about this before, but yeah.
Yeah. So I assumed everything was good because I was sending them back to the factory. I checked first with Ann to make sure it was okay and that they would do it, and then I would send it back, and they would replace the thumb stud and send it to me.
Yeah.
And I'd assemble the customer's knife and send it. Well, I forget which model it is that has the little rubber washers on the thumb studs, but I had one of those that I was doing for a customer, and I had taken it apart, destroyed the thumb studs, sent it out, and basically Chris lost his mind when he saw it. And basically he was like, no, we won't replace that anymore. And I was like, and I reached out, I was like, hey, I get it. You don't want me to do these. I didn't understand that. I thought we were good. Can you replace this? It's a customer's knife, and that'll be it. And Ann basically said, no, he won't do that. He either gets a new blade or this one comes back as it is.
Oh, wow.
I was like, well, send it back to me as it is. And I took the destroyed thumb studs. I had thrown them away, but I don't empty the trash that often because for whatever reason, that trash can didn't get emptied often. And I dug them out, and I took them to a machine shop, and I had them make a set.
Yeah.
I ended up losing money on this project, but I got the customer's knife back with the regrind, and then I called Chris and talked to him. And that was an interesting conversation, pretty much one-sided for about 45 minutes. At the end of that, I came away, I was like, hey, I'm sorry. And gentleman's agreement, I will no longer do any regrinds on Chris Reeves knives, which has made the ones that I did much more valuable. But even my own Sabenza is not reground.
Yeah.
If someone has a problem, it's a small industry, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to make anybody upset, at least not intentionally.
It sounds like his concern was around the fact that you modified the knife and then he's being asked to work on it, and that almost... No, not really. Basically, he told me that he made the perfect knife and it was perfect as is, and why would anybody make it? You want to change it? And he's like, if you want to change it, just make your own knives. I'm like, well, okay, I do, but sorry. And so, but yeah, he did not want anyone messing with his creation, which is fine. I totally get that. I ran into the same thing recently with Spartan Knives. Brain fart. Who designs for Spartan Knives? Lance or somebody else?
No, lives in Bill Harsey.
Bill
Harsey. I did a regrind on a gentleman on a Spartan knife, and I put my logo on it, and he basically called me out for putting my logo on his work, and I was like, I'm actually trying to keep it where my work is documented, but I will no longer work on Spartan knives either because he asked me not to. So
yeah,
it's easy. I mean, like I said, I don't do that many anymore anyways. And I try to do the ones that are easy for me, because of a time thing. So if it's something that I don't think is easy or I haven't done it, odds are I'm not going to do another one.
Yeah.
Do it. So.
Right. So the point of those stories isn't to throw shade at Reed or at Harsey or anybody else.
No, I highly respect both of those people. And just miscommunication. Like I said, this industry is small. I've looked up to both of these guys for, 30 years.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do is
burn
cause issues.
Yeah. Right. Nobody wins when that happens.
No, like I said, I'm not getting rich on this anyways. If somebody doesn't want me to regrind one of their knives, like I said, it's a gentleman's agreement. I just won't do it.
Right. So there's guardrails kind of on the...
Well, I get asked a lot for Chris Reeves knives especially, but I'm just not willing to do it.
Yeah.
Like I said, mine isn't reground either.
Right.
I look up to both of those guys that were mentioned immensely. I think a lot of them, and I think they're at the top of the heap in the knife industry. They're literally living legends.
Yeah, absolutely.
So respect should be given.
Yep. Interesting stuff, Tom. So are you still doing them, or is this kind of in a when you can thing, or what's the situation with you and Regrinds today?
So yeah, I'm not looking for a whole lot of work. As far as that goes, I'm super busy with what I've got going on right now with trying to do, my custom stuff. I'm working on production stuff right now, like in-house production. So that's a whole nother thing that I'm doing and starting. And so, yeah, I'll still take in a little bit of regrind work, but it has to be stuff that is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to do anything complex or, just a straightforward performance-oriented regrind, and not that many really. I'm kind of limiting it. And yeah, that's it. I quit for quite a few years. I started back maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and now I'm just kind of keeping it, 2, 3, 4 a week, and that's about all I really want to do.
No, it makes sense. It certainly does not make sense to trade away doing your regular stuff, right? That has long-term value in it to do these.
Yeah.
So it's
I can't. I mean, the production run I'm working on right now is really sucking up a lot of time and effort, money, all that stuff. But I think it's really the direction I've got to go. And so even my custom stuff is kind of getting put on hold a little bit for that.
Yeah.
Still doing quite a few. But yeah, I can't scale what I'm doing right now, and I've got to change that a little bit.
No, it makes sense. All right, man. Very interesting conversation about regrinds.
Hopefully that answered some questions. I still get asked a lot of questions about regrinds, and that puts down some of the history. And like I said, I don't think I'm the first person to ever modify a knife by grinding it, but I definitely am the first person to start, quote unquote, a regrind. It's documented on Blade forums, and kind of crazy.
All right. Well, like you said, I think it's interesting history. It's interesting explanation. It'll be helpful for listeners, new and old, to kind of know a little more of the story. Even for people, I think, who are familiar with the geometry aspect of it, I think there's some good stuff in there to hear and talk about. So thanks for taking the time to talk about it, Tom.
Yeah, hopefully people enjoyed it. And, if there's some other topics people would like, for minisodes or any of that kind of stuff, I'd love to entertain those ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, the minis are fun. I think we don't get as much listenership for them, but I think there's some great nuggets in them. And it lets us kind of explore a little more without having to make a giant, big crew 2-hour plus show like we typically do, and dig into some topics like this one. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Cool, man. Thanks.
All right. Well, as always, thanks to all of our folks who support us on Patreon, who join us on Facebook, who follow us on Instagram. We appreciate everybody, and stick with us. We'll keep bringing you this kind of thing as often as we can, and it's enjoyable for us. We look forward to getting together. So it's a little selfish, and on top of trying to get it out there as information.
Yeah, agree.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, guys.
To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Krein on the web at kreinknives.net, in his Facebook group, Krein Knives, or in his Instagram account, @KreinKnives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram @BirchTreeBlades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram @msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram @markofthemaker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.